Creative Babble.
Yeah, Javier, just kind of tell me what you know about the Miranda rights.
Well, Miranda Rights. I mean, everybody knows that if you get arrested, the officer has to read you your rights. If they don't read you your rights, then maybe the evidence or your confession or whatever gets thrown out in court. That's really all I know about it. I don't even know how this got started.
Yeah, and I have studied this case before, but I somehow had forgotten that all of this is based on a case out of Arizona. Would you be surprised to learn that this case was actually a rape case that it's based off of?
I had no idea. So this was a rape case, and
yeah, I mean, so the idea one is that Miranda versus Arizona was the Supreme Court case, and Miranda was the perpetrator, the actual rapist in this case, Ernesto Miranda. And so it was a case where, he had a confession, and it was eventually thrown out by the Supreme Court because he was not advised of his rights.
Wow. So this man accused of rape, Miranda, the case went away just because they didn't read him his rights. I mean, that's like the whole conception of this idea of Miranda rights.
Right. I mean, it went back to a second trial because they threw out his confession. So the state had to retry him. And that this idea that all the focus, I mean, the names, the landmark aspects of this case are tied to the name Miranda, who was the perpetrator. The person who is completely left out of the entire story here is the victim.
Yeah. And what do we know about this victim?
Yeah, so this case happened in the early 1960s, and a totally different era. And it was a young girl. She was, I think, still in high school, and she had been abducted by this man and raped. And so she had to come forward and agree to testify. And there were a lot of people telling her not to do it and that she didn't have anything to gain by doing it. So this movie that we're going to be talking about, Miranda's Victim, it goes into and it tells the story of the victim in this case, which has been completely lost.
Bury the body for me.
Because of the landmark Supreme Court case, Miranda versus Arizona, police must read individuals who are in custody their Miranda rights prior to questioning. This U.S. Supreme Court case is studied and analyzed by law students and legal scholars everywhere. However, the one component of this case that seemed to be lost to history is the victim, a young girl who was kidnapped and raped by Ernesto Miranda. The newly released movie Miranda's Victim delves into the underlying rape case and the victim who refused to stay quiet. Today I'm interviewing George Kolber, who after 60 years tracked down Patricia Weir, the victim from Miranda v. Arizona, and convinced her to tell her story. After extensive research and in-depth interviews with the victim, George Kolber wrote and produced the newly released movie Miranda's Victim. Here is a portion from my discussion with George Kolber. Tell me a little bit about how you got the idea to write about Miranda versus Arizona.
This is really a pandemic story, if you will. I was just wrapping up another screenplay that I was working on. I'm sitting at my desk, and the pandemic, it was the first days of the pandemic, and everybody was quite depressed, including me. And I was sitting at my computer, and I hear somebody reading the Miranda warning. And I said, I'm sitting here, and I knew a guy a long time ago said that he actually worked for Arizona on that case. So let me see what I can find if where Lou worked on this. And I started with the Supreme Court decision, and I started glancing at that. And I said, no, Lou, let me see. Maybe it was the Arizona Supreme Court. And I started looking at that, and I never found Lou, but I started getting engaged in this story. And I'm saying, well, this guy was accused of rape. This guy had a tremendous kidnap rape. He tossed this woman in the back of a car, drove her away for 20 minutes. I'm saying, whoa, there's a little more here than you can imagine. And then, so I started to go back in time a little bit more. I engaged my niece, especially, who was also sitting home with nothing to do, and I love her dearly. She's got a doctorate in chemistry, so I knew she knew how to research. And I have an auditing background from an early chapter in my life, and the two of us worked very hard on uncovering a lot of the details that nobody really knew. And I said, especially the manner in which he died, which I'm not going to go into right now, except to say that there was an irony there that I said, wow, this is an incredible story. And so that's what really sort of got me into it. But we went back in time, and I said, well, what happened to the victim? I mean, this is called Miranda's Rights, but Miranda's a bad guy. I mean, we found out that Miranda was got dishonorably discharged from the military, and I was in the military, and I know that's a very hard thing to do. There's less than honorable, there's medical, there's Section 8, there's all these other things, but to get a dishonorable discharge takes some work. But, this is a bad guy. Why do we have a law named after this? What happened to the victim? And so we went back, we checked her high school records. I tracked her down. We know where she got married. We located her near West Point, New York currently. And I went and I tracked her down to a campground, but, she never told her family that she was the victim, that this was a landmark case, and she was the victim that was in that landmark case. They didn't know. And I went up there, I found her, and I convinced her. I said, this is something, we need to see your point of view on this case, and I want to make sure I get it right. And I said also to her, I said, you got to understand one thing. The case is more important than you or me. It's an important case, and the reality of life is that you are a hero, and I want to make sure that I do it the right way.
How important was it to you to get the victim's perspective on this case?
I had already written this screenplay, and I had a lot of the facts wrong. And she gave me so much more information that I didn't know. For example, her relationship with her husband, very importantly, and what she was going through at the time. She suppressed all of this. She went through 2 trials. She didn't have to go through either. And so she went through 2 trials. And then after the second trial, remember, this was in 1960s, or, the event initially took place in 1963. She had no alternative but just to suppress her emotions, because there was no counseling at the time. There was no rape kits at the time. The polygraph test she had to endure, the physical exam that she had to endure was really very tough on a kid. I mean, she was a high schooler. And at that time, you were sort of guilty if you were a woman. What was she doing walking home so late at night? Was her blouse buttoned all the way to the top? Was her skirt too short, maybe? Because maybe she was asking for it. Or maybe she was out with somebody else. And, she was really brave at the time for being young and coming out when most people would not do it, so.
Think that she did choose to report this rape when so few women do make that decision.
Yeah, it was really hard for her because her mother discouraged her. And it appears that her mother may very well have gone through something similar in decades earlier. And so she discouraged it because she said, what's to be gained? The only thing you can do is what I did, essentially, which was forget it and move on with your life. And the mother had a different perspective. On the other hand, her sister, who she was incredibly close to, felt her pain. And her sister wanted her to report it for any number of reasons. One, they all agreed, as did Trish, that you got to stop this guy. And maybe there would be some cathartic result as a result of, if you testify against him.
I think that we can all relate to her sister pushing her to want to go after this guy, because that's like that sense of justice. But I found her mother to be the most interesting character in the movie because she had many motivations and they go against justice. But in tell me your thoughts on this, but it seemed like she was very interested in her daughter's best interests, not in justice, not in society, not in stopping this guy, but just in her daughter. But what was kind of your takeaway on how you presented the mother? What do you think her motivations were?
Well, and again, first of all, Morellanos did such an incredible job convincing you that there was another perspective here. I mean, a 1960s perspective. She was concerned that her daughter would be outed. She was concerned that her daughter wouldn't find a husband. She was concerned that, all of these bad things, she wouldn't be able to get a job. You get a job, a man it's going to be hard to hire you because, let's face it, women did mostly secretarial work at that time. What happened is that those were her concerns, and she was worried about her future. And she only had the information to go on that was available at the time. And the reality is she was very concerned, but in a different way than her sister was.
What do you think that impact was on the victim going through all the trial?
Yeah.
I mean, what was the emotional toll that she had to take?
It's interesting. Before I met her, I had a different take on it because I could only imagine what it was. And I knew it was a story that had to be told whether or not I met her. In fact, when I saw her, one of the things that convinced her to talk to me was I said, Trish, let me tell you something. I'm going to tell the story whether or not you help me, but I'd love for you to help me because I really want to get it as accurate as I possibly can. But I guess I forgot the initial question because I segued. I'm bad that way.
I was asking about what kind of toll you think that she had to take by having to testify at 2 trials and just endure the entire criminal justice system.
She definitely forgot so much of it. And in fact, once again, she didn't even tell her family. Nobody understood what was going on. She kept it a secret her whole life. The only one that knew was her husband, and they didn't talk about it. They subsequently got divorced. But she was very deliberate in putting it behind her and moving on with her life because she felt that she didn't have any alternative. So you think about it, now that she's coming out 60 years later, it's the first real opportunity that she had to come out and tell and correct the story that I had. And I've got to tell you something, the true story behind Trish and her bravery, quite frankly, is more compelling than I even imagined in the first place. So she's quite an extraordinary woman. I was very fortunate this past weekend, we shot a lot of the movie at Monmouth University in West Long Branch, New Jersey. And for the first time, we brought Trish out. We had a panel discussion after the movie, and we introduced Trish to the world for the very first time. And, after everybody saw the movie, the standing ovation that she got from everybody in this theater, 700-seat theater, was absolutely incredible. Brought a tear to everybody's eye. They saw how brave this woman is, not only then, but now to come out again 60 years later.
Yeah, I mean, she had a lot to lose by going to trial and testifying against this guy and very little to gain. It's society who gained and possibly his next victims who gained, not her. It was very impressive. And as you described her, very heroic, the decision that she made to go after this guy.
I think one of the things that we want to do is bring out the fact that today they have help that they didn't have 60 years ago. If something happens to you, and reporting it is probably, a serial rapist is just that, a serial rapist. If he's done one, he's done a whole lot more than one. And we see that in the news today, how many times, I'm not going to mention celebrities' names, but they apparently have done things. All right. And just coming out encouraging people to come out is probably saving somebody that we'll never even know. So she is so strong. And I think that's what she said Saturday. She goes, come out now. You don't have to wait 60 years anymore.
Yeah, I loved how the movie illustrated the lack of bedside manner of almost everyone she interacted with, because I felt that was so accurate. And it's one of those things you probably could argue is much better today.
Well, first of all, they were all men. The detectives were men. The doctor that examined her was a man. We talk about the polygraph exam, but in the real world, the polygraph was a male conducting it. And again, the laws were totally different back then too. I mean, the bar was very high in favor of the defendant. And I wanted to capture that. It was very deliberate, especially on the doctor scene, but it was humiliating for a woman, and especially Trish, who at the time was a virgin. She was never exposed to any of these kinds of examinations before. The rape kit didn't even come into being until the 70s. So, and there was the only person that stood by her side during this whole exam was her sister, right? There was no compassion that you have now, and we try to bring that out because we think the lack of compassion then is justified by saying that there should be more compassion now. People are more understanding now. So, only 5% of all the reported rapes end in conviction. So the key is to stop it. But obviously the best way to stop it is also to convict the guilty parties.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of that was really well captured in the movie. One of the things that I grappled with throughout the movie, and I wanted to kind of get your take on how you handled this, which was the intellectual legal side of this story, which is, what's right, what's wrong, legal precedent wise, versus the emotional side of a victim of rape. And just how did you juggle both of those things within this story?
Well, clearly this was, social justice versus the rights to a woman. And so they're conflicting. And everybody tells me, well, which is right and which is wrong. And I say, you want to know something? I don't want to draw that conclusion. I want to let the viewer draw the conclusion. We just presented the facts very accurately. In fact, the court transcripts, the transcripts we embraced in the scenes. So 2 court transcripts, the Supreme Court decision, Judge Wren's decision, all of those include a lot of the real transcripts for the real trial. The thing is, and I asked Trish and Trisha's family this very same question, which is, what do you think about Miranda Rights? All right, the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney. And she was very clear to me. She says, you want to know something? It's a good rule named after a bad person.
In writing and producing this film, George Kober developed a strong bond with the victim in the case, Patricia Weir.
To me, it was important that, I protect her, and I love her to this day.
In 1966, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled a 5-4 decision that Fifth Amendment rights apply to all persons who have been arrested or their freedoms restricted. As a result, if a person has not been warned or read their Miranda rights while in custody, the prosecution cannot use any statement the person makes. This landmark decision forever changed the criminal justice system. Check out Miranda's Victim on your streaming platform of choice. It has an all-star cast including Ryan Felipe, Emily Van Camp, and Luke Wilson. It tells a compelling and heroic story of a victim who fought for what was right. Also, heads up, John and I are working on the next season of Criminal Conduct. We're actually heading to Las Vegas. So look out for season 5 of Criminal Conduct in early 2024.
Creative Babble.